Hey folks, welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is sort of a book review. I've been trying to think about what I'm going to say for like a week, but I can't seem to pin anything down, so I'm just going to wing it, which is also going to be interesting given that I haven't been very well today, so we'll see how we go. But the book that I want to talk about is Living on Stolen Land by Ambelin Kwaymullina. I'll push it forward there so you can see the cover properly. So the back refers to this as a prose style manifesto about our settler colonial present. At once a call and a guide to action. Yeah, so of interest to anyone interested in decolonising Australia. Basically, it's a short book. It's tiny. Like, see, tiny thin. It's beautiful. It's prose poetry. It uses, like most poetry that I really like, it uses plain English, clear words. There's nowhere to hide when you're reading this. Like, the language and the way it's set out, it doesn't leave any misunderstandings. Like, it's perfectly clear. And honestly, I think every single policymaker in Australia should read this book. And I say that as someone who, although I work in the public service, I'm not an actual policymaker. I'm a program person. But it's honest. It's blunt. It explains the differences in the way Indigenous people think and the way that, as Ambelin refers to them as the settler colonizer, as how they think. And that there's this deep disconnect in the way that these two groups of people view the world that is very much behind why, even after 200 odd years, there's not been a lot of healing. And there's not been there's been some progress, but there's this gap in between the way Indigenous people think and the way everyone else thinks, which essentially she's saying that everyone else needs to actually start thinking about the way Indigenous people think and the way Indigenous people see the world. And that nothing is going to change until we do that. And it's also challenging. It's challenging the reader to think about where they sit on the spectrum of whether they're she lists, I think, 4 types of people who aren't Indigenous, whether they're allies, whether they are, and 3 other different levels of how other people interact with Indigenous people. And she challenges the reader to think about where they fall on that spectrum and where they want to fall on that spectrum. And she's encouraging. She's totally blunt and totally honest and challenging about, this is the history that we have. This is the problem. But she's also encouraging in how people can take steps to be part of the solution. And challenges people to challenge their way of thinking, to challenge the way they interact with Indigenous people, with Indigenous culture, with Indigenous country. So there's a hopeful tone to it as well. And honestly, I've done a number of courses through work on Indigenous cultural awareness. And like I've done the like 8-hour online course that the Indigenous agency IATSIS, was it IATSIS or was it one of the Indigenous like educational institutions they put together. And so I've done that, and yet this tiny little slim volume explained everything in such a way that I felt like I'd started to understand. I probably don't completely understand, but it definitely seemed clearer to me than any other way I've seen it put. And I think maybe if I reread it and reread it and reread it, it will help. It will help my thinking as an individual, and it will help the way that I interact with this country, these people. So, yeah, I think this is... So, I don't even know if I'm being coherent right now, but I think this is an incredibly important book for anybody that wants to help heal the wounds of the past, anyone who wants to help drive for a better future. And like I said, I think every single policymaker in Australia should read this book. Particularly if they're going to be dealing with Indigenous policy, but any government policy, I think, any policymaker should at least have this knowledge, at least understand what the basis of interaction is and where the problems lie. And I think this is a really good baseline primer, easily understandable way of doing so. So that's a lot of rambling. I'm hoping I've sort of got my opinion across. You know me, I don't do a lot of individual book reviews, but I think, and it's not even a review, it's people should read this book. Just please, particularly if you're Australian, read this book. It's well worth it. And like it's like barely 60 pages. It's a little over 60 pages, not even 70 pages. It's beautiful, it's well written, it's well illustrated, it's very clear, it's not confusing at all. It is challenging, it is difficult if you're not willing to have an open mind, but I honestly think people should read this book. People should read Living on Stolen Land by Ambelin Kwaymullina. And that's pretty much all I have to say. So I will see you all again really soon. Bye.